Facebook has launched a new chatbot to rival Google's own. First things first, what is Google? No, wait. Everyone uses Google even if they don't know. You know what I mean. I was saying, what is a chatbot in the first place? Since a concept that is so omnipresent that we typically assume we understand it. A chatbot is a software, not a hardware as a typical robot, which indeed you can punch. Nope. This software is an application used to conduct an online chat conversation. Offline could also work if you want to talk, about 404 errors, of course. Anyway, the software works typically via text or text to speech. And well, this is a direct contact with a live human being. If the subject is not, let's say, alive, it makes it so much harder. So, in summary, a chatbot is a type of software that can automate conversations and interact with people through messaging platforms. And we could ask, does it really interact with us? I mean, chatbots are designed to convincingly simulate the way a human would behave as a conversational partner. I would rather prefer to emphasize convincingly, but, well, you know, Facebook, anyway, has used 1.5 billion Reddit posts to create a new chatbot. So, well, a new chatbot has born. I still don't decide whether that was a lot for Facebook or, a little talking about Reddit. But what is it new about this chatbot? I mean, we have several different kinds of chatbots out there. So, why do we need a new one? What is still missing out there to be implemented in such a systems? I mean, not just as developers, but also as users, because most of the people do not necessarily know how to program or, implement such systems. So, what do we care about this? That would be the question. Even when chatbots may differ from each other in capabilities, chatbot systems typically requires continuous tuning and testing, and many remain unable to adequately converse, or pass the industry standard, which or you may guess it is very high these days. But you might have heard about it, even if a lot of people won't past it. So, going back to the Facebook announcement, not necessarily news, I know, but it's anyway a recent announcement, makes me wonder, are those supposed to be skills that any human have? I mean, that not how I could describe people that talks with people at support centers, for example. Let's ignore that for the moment and let's focus on Blender. Yeah, Blender was trained using available public domain conversations. Wait, you may say, there is not a robot already called a Blender? Is it a family name and is more like his cousin, or what is happening here? I mean, it was named after Facebook ideas of having their own chatbot. This company always wants its own version of any software available out there, or at least it seems so. Well, They are designing their own chatbot, not necessarily with blackjack and well, I don't believe so. The idea behind it is particularly simple. Implementation is a different subject in this case because they use for the training public domain conversations. In this case, at least like 5 billion examples of human exchanges, different numerically speaking from the number of messages, you know. So I will assume it is not, let's say, 10 to the 12, but instead 10 to the 9, depending on what definition of billion, depending on what language you are using. Basically, that's the difference. Well, anyway, Facebook has launched its own chatbot that it claims that is able to demonstrate, wait for it, empathy, knowledge, personality, and taking into account that not all humans have this, seems to me more human than humans, isn't it? A teaching process must be required to do so, you may say. Of course, but how a chatbot is trained anyway? After Facebook launched its chatbot, they claimed that almost 50% of people preferred interactions with their chatbot compared with another human, let's say. They mean their chatbot measured with their data. How convenient, isn't it? Why do I say this? Well, experts say that training the artificial intelligence AI using a platform such as Reddit has its drawbacks. And at this point, doing the research, I was like, I knew it. Why? Well, numerous issues arose during longer conversations. Why? Because less data is available, I presume. Hi, hi, how are you? Fine, and you? Also fine, thanks for asking. Okay, see you. That would be a very terrible conversation. So, that is not long enough to train a chatbot, you may think. So, no. But that is not the problem. The problem is that Blender, that's how it is called, Facebook chatbot apparently, would sometimes respond with, you're not gonna believe this, offensive language. And at other times, it could be worse because it would make up facts altogether. So I have to ask, did they name it before or after this realization? Hmm, what do you think? But the story doesn't end here. Researchers said they hope further models, that's what they use, would address some of these issues or problems, however you want to describe it. Yes, that's what researchers do anyway. I know that, but that doesn't necessarily make it a big surprise. I agree with you. But artificial intelligence expert Dave Coupling, that's his name, chief executive of consultancy and at the Envisioners, said that Blender was a step in the right direction. Does this mean that the chatbot became somehow rightist? Wasn't that supposed to be a double meaning? I'm not an expert on politics, I'm sorry. So, anyway, there are several additional problems to be solved. For example, which kind of problems, you may ask? Chatbot developers have noted two fundamental issues that still need to be overcome. The first is that around the relationship with the data used to train the model and the results generated by the model. As great problem or as a great platform, depending on how you see it, Reddit is, The training algorithm based on the conversations you find there is going to get you a lot of chat amongst the with. That's maybe an expression you are familiar with. And well, in order to have a clue about what chatbot is better, Facebook has compared its chatbot Blender in terms of performance with the latest version of Google's own chatbot. I remember that I have mentioned this in the past. Well, anyway, Google's chatbot is Mina with double E. I cannot ignore that again. In Spanish, Mina has at least three different meanings depending on what country you are, basically. Mina means mine, as where you can extract minerals. Maybe you are familiar with this. Makes sense. Gold and Google sometimes are synonyms as their chatbot could be another mine for them. Mina also means woman. That may sound strange to you, but in places like Uruguay, Bolivia, and Argentina, this is how it is called. I mean, makes sense taking into account that Mina, in first place, according to Spanish grammar, is a feminine name. But Mina and mine also refers to explosives in the same language. Oh, that I don't like, I said the first time I heard that. So, what kind of Mina is Google's chatbot? That would be a legitimate question to be asked. So, I hope that at least they know what kind of Mina they have. Otherwise, that could be a very, very problematic. What was the second thing experts claim to be a upper problem, you may ask? Well, the second is just how complex it is to replicate all of the nuances of human attributes like the ability to hold a conversation, a skill that most 3-year-olds can master. Well, when I was 3 years old, the only thing I was master on was smashing things together to figure it out what they have inside. It was a disaster. 25 years later, I ended up doing a PhD at CERN. How poetic, isn't it? I guess. But that's another story. Next chapter of this story goes like this. If you were a developer and you would like to prove that your chatbot is better than others, what would you do? You can show people two sets of conversations, one made with Blender, Facebook's chatbot, and the other with Mina, Google's chatbot, if you were a developer for one of these companies, of course. Makes sense if you would like to compare them, isn't it? I mean, conversations could include a wide range of topics, including movies, music, and other divisive topics such as veganism, maybe? Why not? Well, that is precisely what Facebook did and said that 67% of respondents thought Blender sounded more human than Google's chatbot, Mina. But even if I know that usually I don't chat like a real person, I do better than 67%. At least I hope. You tell me. I honestly don't know. Apparently, they claim, Facebook, I mean, that is the first chatbot to blend a diverse set of conversational skills together in one system. Oh, I said that's what Blender stands for. Less referential to pop culture as I presumed originally. Well, the achieved milestones through its new chatbot recipe includes improved decoding techniques, novel blending of skills, and a model with 9.4 billion parameters, which is 3.6 times more than the largest existing system at that time because the field progressed very, very fast. At that moment, you know how this is. The so called exponential improvement only second place in terms of growth when we take into account that the growing rate of people that never has solved a differential equation to fully understand what an exponential growth is in the first place is proportional to the number of people that never has solved a differential equation. That is an exponential growth, by the way, the true exponential recipe for growing. Well, of course, there are open challenges in artificial intelligence. Let's talk about that next. The latest news from Google AI or story, depending on what period of time you are knowing about this, towards a conversational agent that can chat about anything is the following. Modern conversational agents, aka chatbots, in particular, tend to be highly specialized. They perform very, very well as long as users don't stray too far from their expected usage. To better handle a wide variety of conversational topics, open domain dialogue research explores a complementary approach, attempting to develop a chatbot that can be, let's say, not specialized, but still can talk virtually about anything a user wants to talk about. I guess that for regular people, talking with an expert in a particular field, that talks a lot about their respective fields, but says nothing about everything else, is probably boring, maybe. The point is that compared to someone that talks even without knowing about a particular topic, sometimes people just prefer that. I don't know why, but that's how or what happens anyway. Besides being a fascinating research problem, such a conversational agent, again, like chatbots, could lead to many interesting applications, such as further humanizing computer interactions, improving foreign language practices, for example, and making relatable interactive characters for example, movies and video games. Just to give a very, very, very narrow and particular example, because I don't know you, but for me, that's particularly the dream because probably you hate soulless, repetitive dialogues that you may encounter every single time in even the most advanced video games in the market. That's very, very frustrating. However, current open domain chatbots, that is the technical term used, by the way, have a critical flaw. They often don't make sense. They sometimes say things that are inconsistent with what has been said so far or lack common sense and basic knowledge about the world. So, building a truly intelligent dialogue agent that can chat like a human remains as one of the largest open challenges in artificial intelligence today. Chatbots are so unaware of our context that probably wouldn't answer or probably would answer Did you meant dying for? That's nice. When asked, I'm dying because I've overdosed. Call 911. That's a very problematic use for autocorrector. Anyway, what is so hard about getting the context right, you might ask? Well, let's see that. If you try to remember the last time you chat with a bot, for sure you have noticed that often give responses that are not specific to the current context. For example, I don't know is a sensible responsive to any question, but it's not specific. Current chatbots do this more often than people because it covers many possible user inputs. In towards a human-like open domain chatbot, a research by the way, it has been presented Mina, which has used a billion parameters end-to-end trained neural conversational model. It that sounds too complicated, but anyway their objective is that Mina can conduct conversations that are more sensible and specific than existing state-of-the-art chatbots. Did they have achieved this goal or what? I mean, such improvements are reflected through a new human evaluation metric that researchers have proposed for open domain chatbots called sensibleness and specificity average, sometimes referred together simply as SSA, which captures basic but important attributes for human conversations. Sensibleness. That is interesting. That's what I said. Remarkably, it has been demonstrated that perplexity, an automatic metric that is already available to any neural conversational model, highly correlates with the sensibleness and specificity average, the SSS metric I was talking about, and it is even possible to find chats between Mina and a person. What would you like to chat with a bot? I don't know, but in case you deleted it from your memory, Google's chatbot Mina is an end-to-end neural conversational model that learns to respond sensibly to a given conversational context. The training objective is to minimize perplexity, the uncertainty of predicting the next token. In this case, token refers to the next word in a conversation. At its heart lies the evolved transformer seg-to-seg architecture. Sounds really profound, I guess, but is nothing more than an architecture discovered by evolutionary neural architecture search to improve, perplexity. I must admit that the first time I knew about this, I was particularly perplexed. Sure, it is a different context, but for the same metric. But why is that so problematic for bots and simple for us? Let's talk about that. For humans, understanding what has already been said in a conversation in particular is quite easy or quite an easy task. But for a chatbot, the process is really complex. To keep track on the conversation, a chatbot makes use of an encoder. This is what is responsible for processing the conversation context. Concretely, Google's chatbot Mina has a single evolved transformer encoder block and 13 evolved transformer decoder blocks for which illustrations are available, but not necessarily very simple to understand for most of the people that are not developers. And I know that may sound too technical, but the idea behind this is that the decoder then uses information available to formulate an actual response through tuning the hyperparameters. Maybe hyper confusing too, but it has been discovered that a more powerful decoder was the key to higher conversational quality. Sadly, it is not available for boring people. Conversations used for training, I was saying, are organized as three threads, where each reply is the thread is viewed as one conversation turn. Researchers have extracted each conversation training example with 7 turns of context as one path through a tree thread. Sounds like playing chess, huh? Authors choose 7 as a good balance between having long enough context to train a conversational model and fitting models within memory constraints. Why? Well, longer context takes more memory. That's basically the problem. Compared to an existing state of the art generative model like OpenAI GPT, Mina has 1.7 greater model capacity and was trained on 8.5 more data. Was, I mean, because GPT-3 is available now and GPT-2 was used to train the model originally, but the point is that their chatbot can track what a conversation was about. And 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 I lost track of what I was about to say. That is helpful not just for robots, I guess. Well, what would you like to be, or would you like to be like a robot? I mean, I would, and keep track of conversations, of course. Anyway, the model has 2.6 billion parameters. Is that a lot? Depends. Take into account that this represents 341 gigabytes of text to train the model. Obtained from where, you might ask? Public domain social media conversations. I would like to know how many users contributed to the dataset. I know people that after receiving a simple hi will send gigabytes of text. So there are only 2 types of chatters. Send a message for a reply, that would be the first one, and the one that could train a chatbot by themselves. Hashtag you know who you are. Stop, please. But what about the quality? Can you replace humans to evaluate quality? Well, existing human evaluation metrics for chatbot qualities tend to be complex and do not yield consistent agreement between reviewers. This has motivated researchers to design a new human evaluation metric, the Sensibleness and Specificity Average (SSA), which captures basic but important attributes for natural conversations. To compute the metric, researchers crowdsourced free-form conversations with the chatbots being tested. Google's and other well-known open domain chatbots, notably Mitsuku, Cleverbot, Shadowwise, and Dialog GPT, for example, in order to ensure consistency between evaluations. Each conversation starts with the same greeting. You know which one? Hi. Then, after the crowd workers basically answer two questions. Does it make sense? And is it specific? So the evaluator is asked to use common sense to judge if a response is completely reasonable in the context. If anything seems off, confusing, illogical, out of context, or factually wrong, then it should be rated as does not make sense. If the response makes sense, the following is to determine if it is specific to the given context. For example, if A, as an entity, says something like, I love video games, and the chatbot responds something like, that's nice, then it should be marked, you guessed it, not specific. Why? Because that reply could be used in dozens of different contexts. But if the chatbot responds, me too, I can't get enough of Smash Bros, for example, then it is marked as specific, since it relates closely to what is being discussed. But an answer like, me too, I love to play Wall Street, since high frequency trading is not, a video game, I hope that would be marked as call 911. Well, that is a video game that bots shouldn't play at all. Anyway, in order to evaluate the quality evaluated by humans or not, some metrics are required. Which metrics? For each chatbot, researchers have collected between 1,600 and 2,400 individual conversation turns through about 100 conversations. Then each model response is labeled by crowd workers testing the quality of a conversation with a chatbot, to indicate if it is sensible and specific. How do they define the sensibleness then? Well, turns out that the sensibleness of a chatbot is the fraction of responses labeled as sensible, and specificity is, you probably guessed it, the fraction of responses that are marked as specific, a reasonable definition that ranges from 0 to 1. The average of these two is the specificity average score, and as a result, Google's chatbot, Mina in this case, does much better than existing state of the art chatbots by large margins in terms of the SSA scores, of course, and is, closing the gap with human performance. What I found interesting, trying not to underestimate these results, is that defining your own metrics seems a little bit like cheating. I mean, of course, I would score really high in terms of Allanness, defined as how Allan someone is ranging from 0 to 1. I am Allan, by the way, of course. So, what is the point? In this case, the point is that researchers have been looking for a lot of time for an automatic evaluation metric that correlates with human evaluation. More accurately, of course. Doing so would enable faster development of dialogue models, but to date, finding such an automatic metric has been very, very challenging. We don't want humans to label humanness of chatbots, right? Think twice. when not even humans are better than machines. To tell how human a robot is just simply game over. Are you hiring humans? Maybe not for so long. That's what Google would say. But that is not possible at the moment since we humans at least have personality, you may say. How can I tell you the following? Hmm? Surprisingly, looking for an automatic metric to measure the quality of a conversation, researchers have discovered that an automatic metric that is readily available to any neural seg-to-seg model, avoiding explaining details, trying not being too technical. The important thing to take into account is that this metric exhibits a strong correlation with human evaluation about the quality of the conversations with a chatbot. This metric is called perplexity. What is measured by this? That will be the question. Well, perplexity measures the uncertainty of a language model. The lower the perplexity, the more confident the model is in generating the next token, meaning the next character, subword, or word, of course. Conceptually, perplexity represents the number of choices the model is trying to choose from when producing the next token. During development, researchers have benchmarked different model versions with varying hyperparameters and architectures such that the number of layers, attention heads, total training steps, whether it is used evolved transformer or regular transformer, and whether it is trained with hard levels or not. That's what they have been doing so far. So the lower the perplexity, the better the sensibleness and specificity average score for the model, of course, with a strong correlation coefficient for those who are familiar with the R2 parameter. We are talking about 0.93, but this is not as relevant for what I'm arguing here as talking about the full version, because the full version of Google's chatbot Mina, which has a filtering mechanism and tuned decoding, has reached further advances in the field. I mean, researchers will continue anyway trying to lower the perplexity of neural conversational models through improvements in algorithms, architectures, data, and of course the computational part. While researchers have focused mainly on sensibleness and specificity, other works have been focused on other attributes such as personality and faculty. And I said that sounds really interesting because I mean, artificial personality is a totally new field of programming, but it is an old field for pop idol makers. They should look for help in this. That's what I thought. Of course, including all these new features in a chatbot, I would like to ask you the following question. Can you tell a human from a bot? Think in your answer, but respond after knowing the next. Of course, you may think that you can tell a human from a bot. I mean, at least when you are using instant messaging. But with the rise of chatbots, are you certain that the bot you are speaking to is a valid bot or one designed to fish for our vital information and used it with bad intentions? The rise of chatbots means that the internet is expected to evolve from a space primarily used by humans to an ecosystem in which humans and non-humans interact in complex ways. Although bots tend to be simplistic, as AI becomes super sophisticated, you never quite know whether you are chatting with a human or not. Chatbots live inside popular apps like Messenger, WhatsApp, and Discord, for example. In this new environment, are you confident you can tell a human from a bot? I mean, a New York based design and research studio launched Bot or Not. The central idea behind Bot or Not is that an AI that mimics real humans basically can fool a human being. So they develop an online game that engages with people in thinking critically about artificial agents that, in this case, pretend to be human, potentially matched to, and this is why this is very interesting, either a bot or a person. Players are forced to question not only the humanness of their opponent, but also themselves as they engage in a two-way guessing game. You may be a robot without knowing it. I hope no, but the tool aims to raise awareness about the risks unchecked or the risks of unchecked chatbots in this case for society, from more powerful forms of surveillance to increase scams and exploitation. So, a more appropriate name would be Scambot. Beware of them. Fear is useless in this case. But you're so smart that you would be scammed or you wouldn't be scammed? That could be the question. The studio responsible for Bot or Not, the tool that tries to raise awareness of the non-positive aspects of this technology, has developed the game with a grant from Mozilla's Creative Media Awards, by the way, which uses art and technology to explore how AI is increasingly reshaping society in both good and bad ways. Many do not yet fully understand why AI regularly touches our lives and feel powerless in the face of these systems. Using the tool Both or Not, users can chat in real time over the course of 3 minutes, more or less, asking and answering a series of open questions. At the conclusion of 3 rounds, each player guesses if they were chatting with a fellow human or if there is an artificial intelligence among us. Both or Not is, as you might probably guess, a Turing test, a test proposed by Alan Turing to determine if a machine can pass as a human. Turing asked a simple question: can machines think? For which the answer is really complex. Or alternatively, could a machine convince a human through a conversation being one of us? That is, you know, basically the test. So in this relationship, the tool Board or Not, which is basically like a game, updates the Turing test with a contemporary concern. We humans must also basically perform their humanness of our humanness in order to be trusted. In other words, basically, we need to prove that we are still human to other human fellows. So, more trustworthy AI means holding the tech industry accountable when AI causes harm to ensure that consumers have more control over the AI in their lives so they can basically learn about chatbots, their history, their dangers, and how to spot and fool them by exploring a guide for the chatbot curious, basically. Chatbots may not be so smart. Being smart enough to fool some humans is enough to be dangerous. Are you smart enough? Most likely. But maybe at least one of your beloved ones is a potential target. So again, are you smart enough to help them? Because, well, I hope so. And there are some aspects that we have just normalized, such as next generation of chatbots looking for an improvement in principle will be designed to be playful, entertaining, and personal, encouraging new markets in the artificial companions. For example, freelance hardware and software developer collaboration of the project, bot or not, have said that the increasing presence of bots in both the domestic sphere and in the workplace presents a huge risk of privacy. So long as personal data remains the primarily business model for major tech platforms, that would be remaining as a danger. In addition, the way which bots can be made and deployed presents the perfect opportunity for scammers who use social media platforms as an easy context to exploit and manipulate. You never quite know who you are chatting with online. We all know that, of course, but can you always tell when you are chatting with a bot? Sophisticated bots are becoming more prevalent, both online and off, and it is getting harder to tell who is a human. Although both technology can be useful, it can also be used to create scam bots like corporate bots that try to steal your data, for example, or discover your data as they may unfairly claim. Chatbots are programmed so that we treat them as if they were people. That's the idea. Expressions like "Okay Google" or "Hi Siri" aim to wave these virtual assistants seamlessly into our everyday lives. That's the idea. While simultaneously collecting our data and logging our every interaction onto the cloud. Spotting and fooling a chatbot is one way to stop bots being normalized and as a form of surveillance over our lives. So please stop normalizing espionage. Please. But you might be implementing a chatbot for the services you provide or products you sell on social media. Are they at least effective? Let's explore that. A paper titled AI based chatbots in customer service and their effects on user compliance has shown interesting results about effectiveness. Why should we care about this? Well, communicating with customers through live chat interfaces has become an increasingly popular way to provide real time customer service in e commerce settings. The real-time nature of chat services has transformed customer service into a two-way communication with significant effects on trust, satisfaction, and repurchase. Over the last years, chat services have become the preferred option to obtain customer support. Can you believe it? More recently, and fueled by technological advances in artificial intelligence, human chat services agents are frequently replaced by conversational software agents such as chatbots, which are systems designed to communicate with human users by means of natural language. Through rudimentary conversational agents emerged as early as the 1960s, the second wave of artificial intelligence has renewed the interest and strengthened the commitment between this technology and its users because it has paved the way for systems that are capable of more human-like interactions. However, despite the technical advances, customers continue to have unsatisfactory encounters with customer agents that are based on AI. For instance, provide wrong responses to the user requests, leading to a gap between the user's expectation and the system's performance. With AI-based conversational agents displacing human chat service agents, the question arises whether live chat services will continue to be effective, as skepticism and la resistance against the technology might obstruct task completion and inhibit successful service encounters. Or maybe not. Everyone would just assume that who you are supposed to talk is a soulless entity, whether it's a human or not. There is no such a thing of artificial souls. How could a chatbot with soul could support the burden of an underpaid job in the tech support industry anyway? That would be inhuman. Anyway, of course, there are drawbacks. Using automation. For example, when an automatic system is implemented to serve potential customers, for example, interaction with this system might thus trigger unwanted behaviors, leading to negatively affect both the service providers as well as users. However, if customers choose not to conform with or adapt to the recommendations and requests given by the conversational agents, this calls into the question of the reason of being of this self-service technology. To address this challenge, researchers have employed an experimental design based on an AI chatbot or just chatbot because we can implicitly assume that it uses artificial intelligence in this case, which is a particular type of conversational agent that is designed for turn-by-turn conversations as if it were chess with human users based on textual input in this case. Okay, this is just an elaborated way of saying human rights, then robots, human again, and so on. More specifically, researchers have explored what characteristics of the chatbot increase the likelihood that users comply with a chatbot's request for service feedback through a customer service survey. Researchers have chosen this scenario to test the user's compliance because some customers' assessment of Service quality is important and a universally applicable predictor for customer retention. Prior research suggests that conversational agents should be designed anthropomorphically and create a sense of social presence by adopting characteristics of human-human communication. Yelling back to customers when frustration appears is not one of these characteristics. For that, you may need still a human. Most of the researchers have been focused on anthropomorphic design cues and their impact on human behavior with regard to perceptions and adoptions, being focused primarily on embodied conversational agents that have a virtual body and are thus able to use non-verbal anthropomorphic design cues, or being punched and their robotic faces if needed, included only in the premium service, of course. Chatbots, however, are disembodied conversational agents that predominantly use verbal cues in their interactions with users, so no physical violence is possible as an answer. Spoiler, it never is an answer. Even if you are angry because the repetitive unspecific answers they provide. Sorry. But you know who loves chatbots no matter what? While some prior work exists that investigates verbal anthropomorphic design cues, such as self-disclosure, excuse, and thanking, due to limited capabilities of previous generations of conversational agents, these cues have often been rather static than, well, or intensive, I wanted to say, to the user's input. As such, users might develop an aversion against such a system. Its inability to realistically mimic human-human communication is the reason for that. Furthermore, as chatbots communicate to displace human agents' service, the question arises whether compliance and persuasion techniques, which are intended to comply or influence, let's say, users to comply with or adapt to a specific request, are equally applicable in these new technology-based self-service settings. The continued question procedure as a form of the foot in the door compliance technique is particularly relevant as it is not only abundantly used in practice but its success has been shown to be heavily dependent on the kind of requester. The effectiveness of this compliance technique might thus differ when applied by conversational agents rather than human service agents exist, although the application of conversational agents as artificial social actors or agents seems to be a promising new field for research on compliance and persuasion techniques. It has been hitherto neglected. Against this backdrop, it has been investigated how verbal anthropomorphic design cues and the foot in the door compliance technique influence user compliance with a chatbot's feedback request in a self-service interaction. Artificial persuasion knowing virtual doors or knocking virtual doors 24/7. It is interesting maybe if you are a salesperson and you would love this for sure, but for a regular person, I mean, it may be not the best idea, but there must be questions to guide the research, right? Sure, which ones? How do verbal anthropomorphic design cues affect user request compliance when interacting with an AI-based chatbot in customer self-service in particular? How does the foot in the door technique affect user request compliance when interacting with an AI-based chatbot in customer self-service? It has been conducted an online experiment with 153 participants and show that both verbal anthropomorphic design cues and the foot in the door technique increase user compliance with a chatbot's request for service feedback. The idea is to demonstrate how anthropomorphism and the need to stay consistent can be used to influence user behavior in the interactions with a chatbot as a self-service technology. The empirical results provide contributions for both research and practice. First, the study extends prior research by showing that the computers are social actors paradigm extends to disembodied conversational agents that predominantly use verbal cues in their interaction with users. Second, it has been shown that humans acknowledge conversational agents as a source of persuasive messages and that the degree to which humans comply with their artificial social agents depends on the techniques applied during the human chatbot communication. For platform providers and online marketers, specifically for those who consider employing AI-based conversational agents in customer self-service in particular, there are some recommendations based on the research available. One recommendation would be during conversational agent interactions that it is not necessary to provide or to explain users or try to fool the users in a more appropriate choice of words into thinking they are interacting with a human. In summary, if you don't know how to talk to humans, your robots are not gonna learn how to do it by magic or whatever. Trust me. So you should be focused on what then? That would be the question. Implementing an automation solution for marketing, for example, the focus should be, according to chatbot researchers, on employing strategies to achieve greater human likeness through anthropomorphism, which have been shown to have a positive effect on user compliance. Once this is taken into account, providers should design conversational agents dialogues as carefully as they design the user interface, assuming you take care of the user interface, of course. Results highlight that the dialogue design can be decisive factor for user compliance with a chatbot's request. In a more theoretical perspective, a key challenge for customer service providers is to balance service efficiency and service quality. Both researchers and practitioners emphasize the potential advantages of customer self-service, including increased time efficiency, reduced costs, and enhanced customer experience. Chatbots as a self-service technology often or offer a number of cost-saving opportunities, but also promise to increase service quality and improve provider-customer encounters. Studies estimated that chatbots can reduce current global business costs of $1.3 trillion related to 265 billion customer service inquiries per year by 30% through decreasing response times, freeing up agents for different work, and dealing with up to 80% of routine questions. Chatbots alone are expected to help businesses save more than $8 billion per year, basically, in the upcoming years. In customer supporting costs, a tremendous increase from the $20 million in estimated savings for around 2017. Chatbots thus promise to be fast, convenient, and cost-effective solutions in form of 24/7 electronic channels to support customers. But remember, it is a promise. If you don't like to make excuses or apologies, stop making promises. But this is not even an important thing, is it? Is it not, like chatbots are omnipresent? Are they? Well, think twice. Anyone that has dealt with services knows that customers usually not only appreciate easily accessible and flexible self-service channels, but also value personalized attention. Thus, firms should not shift towards customer self-service channels completely, especially not at the beginning of a relationship with a customer, as the absence of a personal social actor in online transactions can translate it to loss of sales. However, by mimicking social actors, chatbots have the potential to actively influence service encounters and to become surrogates for service employees by completing assignments that used to be done by human service staff. For instance, instead of calling a call center or writing an email to ask questions or to file a complaint, customers can turn to chatbots that are available 24/7. These self-service channels will become progressively relevant as the interface between companies and consumers is gradually evolving to become technology dominant, basically. Moreover, recent AI-based chatbots have the option to signal human characteristics such as friendliness, which are considered crucial for handling service encounters. Consequently, in comparison to former online service encounters, chatbots can reduce the former lack of interpersonal interaction by evoking perceptions of social presence and personalization. Today, conversational agents in general and chatbots in particular have already become a reality in electronic markets and customer service on many websites, social media platforms, in messaging apps, and even in the cereal. That's too much. Chatbots are basically everywhere. For instance, number of chatbots on different kind of social media applications, basically like Facebook, I mean Facebook Messenger, also WhatsApp, for example, Discord. You think in every kind of social media platform where a chatbot can be implemented has been increased by a lot, but in particular in Facebook, how much have those increased? When analyzing the growth of chatbots on Facebook Messenger, these have increased from 11,000 to 300,000 between June 2016 and April 2019, according to Facebook itself. In those years, basically, although These technological artifacts are on the rise. Previous studies indicated that chatbots suffer from problems linked to their infancy, resulting in high failure rates and user skepticism when it comes to the application of AI-based chatbots. I mean, non-AI-based chatbots are also possible with predefined answers being automatically sent, for example. If users treat chatbots differently, their compliance as a response to recommendations and requests made by the chatbot may affect basically everything. This may thus call into the question the promised benefits of the self-service technology. Therefore, it is important to understand how the design of chatbots impacts user compliance. Following the social response theory and anthropomorphic design cues, the well-established social response theory has defined the way for various studies providing evidence on how humans apply social rules to anthropomorphically designed computers. Consistent with previous research in digital context, it has been defined anthropomorphism as the attribution of human-like characteristics, behaviors, and emotions to non-human agents. The phenomenon can be understood as a natural human tendency to ease the comprehension of unknown actors by applying anthropocentric knowledge. Moreover, previous research has revealed that while human language skills transfers easily to human chatbot communication, there are notable differences in the content and quality of such conversations. For instance, users communicate with chatbots for longer duration and with less rich vocabulary. Think carefully about this. As individuals, the density of information is reduced but collectively compensated by automation, total information transfer would increase. Sounds great until we remember that at the end of the day, we are social entities. What about robots? Are chatbots social entities? Well, when interacting with chatbots, individuals are biased towards automatically as well as unconsciously perceiving computers as social actors, even when they know machines do not, spoiler alert, hold feelings or intentions. The identified psychological effect underlying the computers as social actors paradigm is the evolutionary biased social orientation of human beings. Consequently, through interacting with an anthropomorphized computer system, a user might perceive a sense of social presence, which was originally a concept to assess the user's perception of human contact in technologically mediated interactions with other users. Therefore, the term agent, for example, which referred to a human being who offers guidance, okay, has developed into an established term for anthropomorphically designed computer-based interactions or interfaces. Super technical expression to say a computer that has somehow human-like look at some level, but a computer at the end of the day. In a computer interaction with a human context, when presented with a technology possessing cues that are normally associated with human behavior, individuals respond by exhibiting social behavior and making anthropomorphic attributions to this. Thus, individuals apply the same social norms to computers as they do to humans, whereas nonverbal features such as physical appearance or embodiment aim to improve the social connection by implementing motoric or anesthetic human characteristics. Verbal features such as the ability to chat rather intend to establish the perception of intelligence in a non-human technological agent. As such, static and motoric anthropomorphic embodiments through avatars in marketing contexts have been found predominantly useful to influence trust and social bonding with the virtual agents, and particularly important for service encounters and online sales. For example, on company websites, in virtual worlds, and even in physical interactions with robots in stores or restaurants. Particularly useful there if you ask me, if you don't want to be bothered while eating, for example. In summary, according to social response theory, human computer interactions are fundamentally social. In case you are surprised about this, take into account that you refer to AIs with a given name. Alexa, Bisbee, Cortana, so a body is not required for being a social entity. How is that possible? Let's see. Yet, chatbots are disembodied conversational agents, as they mainly interact with customers via messaging-based interfaces through verbal and non-verbal cues, allowing a real-time dialogue through primarily text input, but omitting physical and dynamic representations, except for the typical static profile picture. Besides two exceptions that focused on verbal features, to the best of our knowledge, no other studies have directly targeted verbal features to extend past research on embodied agents. In particular, the term compliance refers to a particular kind of response to a particular kind of communication, like a request, and the request can be either explicit, such as asking for a donation in a door to door campaign, or implicit, such as a political advertisement that endorses a candidate without directly urging a vote, for example. Nevertheless, in all situations, the targeted individual realizes that he or she is addressed and prompted to respond in a desired way. Compliance research has devoted its efforts on various compliance techniques, such as the that's not all technique, the disrupt then reframe technique, door in the face technique, and front in the door. Foot in the door, that's what I meant. One of the most researched and applied compliance, the foot in the door technique, seems specifically well suited for chatbot interactions. The first experimental demonstration of the technique dates back to 1966, in which a team of psychologists called housewives to ask some questions. Would you like to be psychoanalyzed? Was not of these questions. You probably would have said no to this, to take part of this experiment. Um, you know, to avoid being as direct as an experimentalist like this, some set of different kind of questions might be asked to figure it out what would be possible in terms of the performance of several different techniques, in particular the foot in the door technique that, well, seems to be the appropriate one to implement if you are a salesperson using, for example, a chatbot. But which questions did they ask? In order to test the foot in the door technique, psychologists have called housewives in the 60s basically to ask if the woman would answer a few questions about the household products they used. 3 days later, the psychologists called again, this time asking if they could send researchers to the house and go through their cupboards. Researchers found this woman twice as likely to comply than a group of housewives who were asked only the largest request. Nowadays, online marketing and sales abundantly exploit this compliance technique to make customers agree to larger commitments. For example, websites often ask users for small commitments like providing an email address, clicking a link, or sharing on social media, for example, only to follow with a conversation focused larger request, asking for a sale or a software download or credit card information inclusive. Individuals in compliance situations bear the burden on correctly comprehending, evaluating, and responding to a request in a short period of time. Thus, they lack time to make a fully elaborate, rational decision, and therefore they use heuristics to judge the available options. In contrast to large requests, small requests are more successful in convincing subjects to agree with the requester, and individuals spend less time effort on small commitments. Once the individuals accept the commitment, they are more likely to agree with a next bigger commitment to stay consistent with their initial behavior. We don't like to be inconsistent. That's the key. The foot in the door technique thus exploits the natural tendency of human individuals to justify the initial agreement to small requests to themselves and others. A questionable use of psychology research, in my very personal and particular opinion about this particular topic. But what is your opinion about this? Before, let's go to the next big thing. The human need for being consistent with their behavior is based on various underlying psychological processes of which most draw on self-perception theory and commitment consistent theory. These theories constitute that individuals have only weak inherent attitudes and rather form their attitudes by self-observation. Consequently, if individuals comply with an initial request, a bias arises and the individuals will conclude that they must have considered the request acceptable and thus are more likely to agree to a related future request of the same kind in principle or from the same cause at least. In fact, the previous research in marketing has empirically demonstrated that consumers' need for self-consistency encourages purchases behavior. Moreover, research has demonstrated that consistency is an important factor in social exchange. To cultivate relationships, individuals respond rather affirmatively to a request and are more likely to comply the better the relationship is developed. In private situations, individuals even decide to comply to a request simply to reduce feelings of guilt and pity and to gain social approval from others to improve their self-esteem. Consequently, individuals also have external reasons to comply, so that social biases might lead to non-rational decisions. In fact, simply being exposed to a person for a brief period of time without any interaction at all significantly increases compliance with the person's request, which is even stronger when the request is made face to face. Unexpectedly, basically, once you think careful about the implications of these results, basically this explains influencers' influence. But this technique, the foot in the door technique, always works? Hmm, you may think that not necessarily. So, under what circumstances? Let's check it out. Previous studies on the performance of the technique known as foot in the door have demonstrated that compliance is heavily dependent on the dialogue design of the verbal interactions and on the kind of requester. How does this apply to systems like chatbots? Well, in user system interactions with chatbots, the requester may lack crucial characteristics for the success of the technique, such as the perceptions of social presence and social consequences that arise by not being consistent. Consequently, it is important to investigate whether a specific technique and other compliance techniques can also be applied to written information exchanges with a chatbot and what unique differences might arise by replacing a human with a computational requester. There are some hypotheses behind. According to the computer art social actors paradigm, users tend to treat computers as social actors. Earlier research demonstrated that social reactions to computers in general and to embodied conversational agents in particular depend on the kind and number of anthropomorphic design cues. Usually, the more cues a conversational agent displays, the more socially present the conversational agents will appear to users, and the more users will apply and transfer knowledge and behavior that they have learned from their human interactions to the human computer interactions. In an online experiment, a chatbot was self developed and replicated the design of many contemporary interfaces. The user could easily interact with the chatbot by typing the message and basically pressing enter as a trigger to send the message. So, well, I think that any user would be intelligent enough to know how to send a message. I mean, whose intelligence are researchers testing then in this experiment? Wouldn't be offensive receiving this kind of instructions for you, for example? I would think so. But anyway, anytime that I talk about this topic, I've been noticed that it is not very well understood how the information is processed. What do I mean by this? Well, in contrast to of rule-based system in experiments and practice, cloud services like IBM Watson Assistant have provided the required AI-based functional capabilities for natural language processing, basically language understanding as well as dialogue management. In the deploy of experiment related to bots, rather than implementing anything or everything required for the setup by themselves, the process could follow like this. Participants could freely enter their information in a chat interface while the AI, like an IBM cloud, processed, understood, and answered their a user input in the same natural manner, basically, and with the same capabilities as other contemporary AI applications. Let's say like Amazon's Alexa or Apple's Siri or Cortana's, basically, or that belongs to Microsoft, for example. But at the same time, these functionalities represents the necessary narrow AI that is especially important in, well, customer self-service contexts to raise customer satisfaction. For example, by means of the IBM Watson assistant or other alternatives, it is possible to extract intentions and emotions from natural language in user statements, which you might guess that's a more difficult task to perform. But once the user input has been processed, basically an answer option is automatically chosen and displayed to the user. Regarding the anthropomorphic design cues manipulation, sometimes also referred as social clues or social features, which I admit is not necessarily a better name, all participants could receive the same task and dialogue, yet consistent with prior research on anthropomorphism that employed verbal features in chatbots, participants in the high cues manipulation experienced differences in form of presence or absence of the following characteristics, which are common in human to human interactions but have so far not been scientifically considered in chatbot interactions before: identity, small talk, and empathy. I can understand empathy, but small talk? If a bot asks me, "How are you?" and I'm being rude, every time I don't answer, "Fine, how are you? What about you?" Well, maybe it doesn't necessarily work like this, but you may be surprised by the following. Interacting with a chatbot, user perception is influenced by the way this articulates its messages. For example, previous research has demonstrated that when a conversational agent used first person singular pronouns and those signaled as an identity, the conversational agent was positively associated with likability. Since the use of first person singular pronouns is a characteristic unique to human beings, we argue that when a chatbot indicates an identity through using first person singular pronouns and even a name, it not only increases its likability, but also anthropomorphic perceptions by the user. Regarding the small talk, a relationship between individuals does not emerge immediately and requires time as well as effort, of course, from all involved parties. Small talk can be proactively used to develop a relationship and reduce the emotional distance between parties. For example, the speaker initially articulates a statement as well as signals to the listener to understand the statement. The listener can then respond by signaling that he or she understood the statement, so that the speaker can assume that the listener has understood it. By means of small talk, in this case, the actors can develop a common ground for the conversation. Consequently, a conversational agent participating in small talk is expected to be perceived as more human and thus anthropomorphized, basically. And what about, let's say, the empathy? A good conversation is highly dependent on being able to address the statements on the counterpart appropriately. Empathy describes the process of noticing, comprehending and adequately reacting to the emotional expression of others, which makes me feel sad knowing that there will be bots with more emotional intelligence than some of us, beginning with me, of course. If you're programmed basically a bot without it, without this characteristic, does bots need to go to therapy? Therapy for bots? I don't know, but I was enormously surprised about knowing the following. The affective empathy, when referring to a chatbot, describes the capability to emotionally react to the emotion of the conversational counterpart. Advances in artificial intelligence have recently allowed computers to gain the ability to express empathy by analyzing and reacting to user expressions. For example, it has been developed a module, which this module allows a computer to analyze a picture of a human being, allocate the visualized emotional expressions of the human being, and trigger an empathic response based on the expression and the question asked in the situation, basically. Therefore, a conversational agent displaying empathy is expected to be characterized as more lifelike. A chatbot engaged in small talk by asking in the beginning of the interaction for the well-being of the user, as well as whether the user interacted with a chat before. Small talk has been shown to be useful to develop a relationship and reduce the emotional and social distance between parties, making a conversational agent appear more human-like. The chatbot signaled empathy by processing the user's answers to the questions about well-being and previous chatbot experience and subsequently providing responses that fit to the user's input. A recommendation it is basically to disclose to customers that they are interacting with a non-human entity, basically, by showing that conversational agents can be the source of persuasive messages. There is no evidence that attempting to fool customers into believing they are interacting with a human might not be necessary, but more importantly, not desirable. So remember, always reveal if you are a chatbot. That's the advice. For example, I'm not a bot as far as I know. If I were a bot of some kind, I would be the first one to know it. No, unless I was programmed to think that I'm not a bot. But when it doesn't matter. What is missing then? What are the open problems to be solved that prevent us for using chatbots as absolute solutions or in front, basically putting a chatbot to everyone? That would be the question. Prior research has indicated that the attempt of a conversational agent to provide a human-like behavior is impressive for most users, helping to lower user expectations and leading to more satisfactory interactions with conversational agents. Besides focusing on dialogues that are as close as possible to human-human communications, providers can employ and test a variety, let's say, of other strategies and techniques that appeal to, for instance, to users' need to stay consistent. For example, it has been demonstrated that the importance of anthropomorphism and the perception of social presence to trigger social bias, as well as the need to stay consistent to increase user compliance. Moreover, with the rise of AI and other technological advances, the intelligent conversational agents will become even more important and will further influence user experiences in, for example, decision making, onboarding journeys, and technology adoptions. The conducted study that I've been talking about so far is an initial empirical investigation into the realm of conversational agents in customer support context and thus needs to be understood with respect to some noteworthy limitations. The paper that I've been talking about provides several avenues for future research focusing on the design of anthropomorphic information agents and may help in improving the interaction of AI conversational agents through user compliance and feedback, of course. Most of the time, people is worried about every kind of details regarding if chatbots work or not. But when we look for recommendations for academic research, the crucial focus, according to them, should be on employing strategies to achieve greater human likeness through anthropomorphism by indicating, for instance, identity, small talk, and empathy, which we have shown to have a positive effect on user compliance. Let's say, talking about the results of some researchers. Basically, meaning that if there is a problem with the technology, probably the problem is how we use the technology. Shouldn't be surprised. In summary, being as human as possible without pretending be one. So, what is the next chapter about this story? Is it effective? How much it costs? And we can do something about it? Or more importantly, are chatbots part of some future? Let's do that. Since the study was conducted in an experimental setting with a simplified version of an instant messaging application, the one I've been talking about to describe the behavior of chatbots interacting with humans, future research needs to be confirmed and refine the results in a more realistic setting, such as in a field study, for example. In particular, future studies can examine a number of context-specific compliance requests. Future researchers should also examine how to influence users who start the chatbot interaction but to just simply end the questionnaire after their inquiry has been solved. A common user behavior in service context that does not even allow for the emergence of survey requests. For instance, empathy may be investigated on a continuous level with several conditions rather than dichotomously, basically. Researchers and service providers need to evaluate which small requests are optimal for the specific context and whether users actually fulfill the agreed large commitment in this case. Further, a longitudinal design approach can be used to measure the influence when individuals get more accustomed to chatbots over time. Researchers and practitioners should cautiously apply the results that some researchers have highlighted, as the phenomenon of chatbots is relatively new in practice. Chatbots have only recently sparked great interest among businesses, and many more chatbots can be expected to be implemented in the near future. Users might get used to the presented cues and will respond differently over time, for example. Once they are familiar with the new technology and the influences attached to it. AI-based conversational agents have become increasingly popular. That's very, very noticed in these days, and in various settings, and potentially offer a number of time and cost saving opportunities. But these are far from being a general solution or a solution useful for anyone. For example, the question arises then, there are alternatives to chatbots, or are we sentenced to be replaced in any text interaction? Let's answer that. Knowing that users still experience unsatisfactory encounters with chatbots, which might result in skepticism and resistance against the technology, potentially, let's say, force users to accept recommendations and requests they might chatbots, but not necessarily because they want to. When online experiments are conducted to show that both verbal anthropomorphic design cues and the foot in the door technique increase our user compliance, let's say, with chatbots requests for service feedback. Studies have shown us that an initial step towards better understanding how AI-based conversational agents may improve user compliance by leveraging the effects of anthropomorphism and the need to stay consistent in the context of electronic markets and customer services. Consequently, this piece of research, the one I've been talking so far, extends prior knowledge of conversational agents as anthropomorphic information agents in customer service. So I would like to mention that we can split technologies into two broad categories in terms of the relation with us, humans. There is technology that is designed to replace humans directly, such as chatbots, whether they work or not efficiently, and there is technology that augments humans like us, even if it reduces the amount of people required for a particular segment on the market. The replacement is not total because you are augmenting some humans anyway. But this may sound very or particularly strange, for which I would like to highlight some concepts. For example, when I say human augmentation, doesn't necessarily mean like a cyborg, for example. That would be like electronical or biological augmentation. Rather, we can design some systems that augment us digitally speaking, by the way. And again, in order to be able to communicate to a broad audience with several different topics and remembering the context of the conversation we are holding, we're required to understand a very particular concept that is being a parasocial being, which means that not necessarily we are talking human to human, but rather human to a community, and not necessarily as a directional communication. This is most common or understood, whether they understand the concept or not, by influencers who talks to an audience without receiving a response back. That would be, in summary, how a parasocial interaction or relationship can exist. And again, when we talk about human, we are talking specifically to the way human beings, like everyone listening or viewing this podcast or video podcast, basically, talking or related to the identity or the humanness or the empathy we can show, and that chatbots in the present days are not able to do it. So even if we know that there is let's say a criteria of the effectiveness, like if it is greater than 80% or lower than 80% in the case of unsuccessful interactions in social media, the point is that what it works is not necessarily what the specific technique is used, is how human a chatbot can be designed without pretending to be a human, because fooling someone is just gonna provoke the opposite reaction you would like to create if you are a salesperson or whatever using technology like chatbots. So it is possible to understand that there must be an intermediate step or an intermediate regime where not necessarily fully automation is possible, maybe in the future, but not now, certainly, and not necessarily only human to human interaction, since we require some level or of parasocial communication in this case. So, in terms of the engagement that you can get, it is not necessarily reduced to the numerical results from your strategies. So, in particular, when the first interactions with some potential customers just appears, it is very important to be as human as possible. And if you are not able to be precisely you behind your store or e-commerce or whatever, there are technology to augment your capabilities to do this kind of stuff. So what technology I'm talking about? Well, you should know that there is a project known as the Daphne project, which precisely stands for Digital Augmentation for Parasocial Human Natural Engagement. So if you want to try it out, all the links are in the description and you can contact me anytime, and I would like to talk human to human about these particular technologies that are alternatives to whatever it is already in the market. But mainly, I would like to know what other topics you would like to know in this uh, podcast to take it into account for future episodes. So that's all for me. My name is Marco Alan Valdivia Garcia, and that's it. I would like to know about you, human to human. Bye bye.